When the bright morning light shot on the house by the sea, Jacob exhaled deeply and stood up slowly. It was not an easy task to solidify the 5 newly unlocked openings. With a total of 50 openings unlocked, Jacob felt like he had elevated half a realm. With a casual wave of his hand, sword energies flew between his fingertips. Each of his fingers emitted one colored light. It was quite a mystic sight. Each of the sword energies he had contained the strength of the 3rd level, an enormous improvement compared with the state he was in when he began cultivating. Refreshed, he got dressed and walked downstairs. He felt hungry. Grandma was back from her morning walk, and now she was listening to the radio while sitting in the wicker chair on the balcony. With her hair pulled into a ponytail, Kathy was seated beside her, chatting as they both munched on some fruits. "Grandma!" Jacob pushed the door open and walked out. "Jacob, come! Do you want to have some fruit?" Grandma asked Jacob. "Sure." He picked up some berries. His grandma and Kathy continued talking about Kathy's parents and their line of work. Jacob stood there in the background silently. He noticed that Kathy looked different. She looked healthier and her face was glowing. The youth pill. Jacob immediately thought of those 3 words. Elixirs were indeed miraculous. A small level 2 elixir pill gave Kathy, who had just entered the world of cultivation, such a drastic change. "Oh, Grandma, I'll go out today," Jacob told her. "Where are you going?" Grandma opened her eyes and asked. "I'm going to Sophie's mom's studio to help her with some errands." "Oh, do what you can to help Helen. Remember to come back for dinner. Their family will come for dinner, and your parents will be back by noon," Grandma said. "Will you guys get bored here all day?" he asked both of them. No, get on with your errands. In a while, Jade and Julia will come, and it will be lively here," Grandma answered. Now those 2 were coming as well? Jacob thought to himself, but didn't voice it. Located in the Art District, the LOM studio was one of the top 6 architectural studios in the country. If Helen didn't spend most of her time with her family, this studio, that only occupied an area of 2,000 square meters, could have been the #1 architectural studio. The students of design majors in top universities of the country fought for the opportunity to be an intern for this studio. However, Jacob, an engineering student, could come into the studio and learn stuff there. The so-called elite students would have been jealous of him if they had known about this. Walking up the iron stairs, Jacob pushed the door open and entered the studio. Some employees were working overtime that Saturday. Their boss, Helen, had not arrived yet, but one of the employees remembered that Jacob had once been there with Sophie, so she greeted him warmly. Jacob sat down, flipped through some design books, and had some tea. Half an hour later, Helen finally came in. Following her was Sophie in a purple sweater. "Jacob, you are early." Helen put the keys on the plate by the door and greeted him. "Good morning, Helen." Jacob stood up. Sophie didn't even look at him. "Well, Soph is here." At the sight of Sophie, the quiet studio suddenly became lively. All the women surrounded her immediately. "Soph, you are getting even more beautiful. I saw you on TV. Your performance was great." Faced with these compliments, Sophie looked up and answered them one by one with politeness. Seeing everyone was there, Helen pulled Jacob to her side and said, "Everyone, this is Jacob. From now on, he will come over and help us every weekend. If he has any problems, please give him a hand." No one would object to the request of the boss, and everyone applauded to welcome the newcomer. Working in this world-renowned architectural studio, one could learn a lot of stuff. Seeing Helen's high regard for Jacob, the employees understood the hidden message. This guy is important. Therefore, the staff would immediately surround him and answer his questions when he was doing the work Helen gave him. While Jacob was running the errands in the office, Sophie sat down at an empty desk and began drawing. Sophie was a gifted artist when it came to sketching, just like her mom. Though she did not have much interest in the calculated designs of architecture, she was much more inclined towards the rough comics she would draw. The staff felt strange since Sophie had never been able to sit still in the past. She would go out and walk around even when she was waiting for her mom to finish the day's work. Sophie was working on some comic characters, and whenever she finished one, she would look up and search for Jacob. Oh, the staff suddenly understood. This Jacob is in fact Sophie's boyfriend. No wonder the boss took such a newbie into the studio, they thought. Today is a busy day, and I'll order some takeout for all of us, Helen came out of her office and said. Okay. Everyone answered her in unison. Helen often took them to have lunch in the nearby fancy restaurants, so once in a while, they didn't mind having takeout food while working overtime. More importantly, Helen gave them not only monetary rewards, but honor as well. That was something a lot of other studios couldn't offer. The big projects and magnificent buildings they had designed were the symbols of their success. I'm meeting a client this afternoon. Call me if you have any problems, Helen said before walking to the door and picking up the keys. Jacob, you can go back with Soph around 4 o'clock. Okay, Jacob answered immediately. Helen left with the keys in her hand. Shortly, the dozen or so boxes of food that Helen ordered arrived at the studio. Sophie took a box and sat beside Jacob. She still hadn't said a single word to him. What's wrong? Why are you looking so serious? Jacob asked her while eating his lunch. Sophie snorted but remained by his side. I didn't ask her to live at our house, you know, Jacob whispered to her. I don't care. Jacob thought this was the response he would get, as he is quite used to Sophie avoiding any confrontation. To his surprise, she turned to look at him and pursed her lips. You didn't tell her not to live with you either, did you? He lowered his head and cleared his throat. Of course, he hadn't asked Kathy not to live with them. I couldn't just tell her to live alone. My whole family is very attached to her. She's my childhood friend, he explained. And is that all she is? A childhood friend? Sophie looked into his eyes and asked. Yes, that is all she is, Jacob answered firmly. Soph, I know that there was some confusion in the past. Our engagement happened so suddenly, and then I found out that Kathy is, in fact, an old friend. I didn't really understand what was happening. But I'm clear now. Kathy is just a friend. After lunch, the staff got back to their busy work. Last month, Helen's design secured a big project, and that would keep them busy for a while. Jacob was instructed to review the architectural design of the other 7 bidders for the project and compare them with Helen's. However, due to his lack of knowledge and background, it was hard for him. Sophie, on the other hand, had moved to Jacob's desk. After taking out some books from her bag, she began to do her homework. Time ticked away, and one female employee walked over and reminded him, Jacob, it's 4 o'clock now. Oh! Jacob had been engrossed in understanding the other designs and commenting on them and didn't even notice the time. Sophie checked her cell phone and found that it was indeed 4 o'clock. It was the first time she had been focusing on her homework for hours on end. Okay, we'll head out then. Seeing Sophie put her homework into her bag, Jacob said to everyone in the studio. That female employee waved at him with a smile. After Jacob and Sophie walked out, this female employee carefully picked up the A4 paper which had Jacob's notes on it, wondering what kind of reviews this newbie could write. Suddenly, her pupils widened slightly. The stores on the street have a 5-degree slant difference with the height of the street. The stores, from the 7th to the 15th, would have the natural sunshine blocked off by the building on the opposite side. These sharp and accurate comments were the results of a powerful sense of space. This woman didn't know that Jacob was a cultivator who could easily control 80 sword energies from all directions. He needed to have a good sense of space. Otherwise, he could have accidentally chopped off his own head. If Noah, who excelled in array formations, had seen these designs, he could have been able to draw out each tile and brick in the graphs. Oblivious to this employee's admiration of his sense of space, Jacob was driving Sophie toward his house. While Jacob drove, Sophie watched him before turning to him slightly in the warm breeze. Looking at his right hand on the gear knob, Sophie thought for a moment before reaching out and slightly drawing on the back of his hand with her finger. "What are you doing? I'm driving." Feeling itchy, he withdrew his arm a little. However, Sophie immediately grabbed his hand and continued to draw on the back of his hand with her finger. "What am I writing?" she asked him. "No idea," Jacob answered without thinking, focusing on the road ahead. Sophie wrote again. "How about this?" "Jacob." She wrote another. "And this?" "Is." She wrote another, and Jacob immediately said, "A. Big. Idiot." Jacob read out the words one by one. "Jacob is a big idiot." Jacob guessed and recited the full sentence. "Oh, you know that as well?" Hearing Jacob's words, Sophie laughed loudly, wrinkling her nose. Jacob turned to look at her and couldn't help but laugh at her cute antics.